Alors, on va commencer parce que c'est 6 heures et nous n'avons pas beaucoup de temps, parce qu'il y en aura des votes bientôt. Alors, bienvenue.
We will start because it's 6 o'clock and we don't have a lot of time.
Our 143rd meeting, and we're continuing our study of Bill C-91, an act respecting Indigenous languages.
Chief Perry Bellegarde and Roger Jones, Special Advisor to the National Chief Languages Act from the Assembly of First Nations. I am going to warn you that there will be bells for a vote, and I will be seeking unanimous consent to continue through that. But if we can begin with your presentation, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nista pixquid neon absisi ninascomun. Kenascum tenwa kaka no temtic no akumaganak. Nista Algonquins kach kiel kenascum tenwa. Just a little bit in Cree. I'm very happy to be here. Ninascomun, happy to be here. Kenascum tenwa, thanking you all as relatives and friends and acknowledging the Algonquin peoples for the ancestral lands here where we gather. And the presentation, about 7-8 minutes. I know the bells will be ringing, so I'm going to get right into it. And just to thank you all for the opportunity to be here. I want to thank the members of the committee and thank you all for inviting me here today to speak to you about Bill C-91, an act respecting Indigenous languages. You have heard about the importance of our languages to our cultures and to our peoples. First Nations languages, we say, are national treasures. And they are essential to who we are as Indigenous peoples, First Nations peoples. Our culture, our identity, and our overall well-being comes from our languages. They are unique to these lands. They are unique to these territories, which is why we always say they're Canada's national treasures. I'd like to address you by speaking to you today on why we are calling for the support of this bill. We have 4 months left. 4 months before June. So timing is of the essence. Number one, the proposed bill answers First Nations calls for the government to recognize, affirm, and meaningfully support and provide funding for First Nations languages. We want our languages to be our living languages, sourced from our lands, expressing our creation stories, and alive in our ceremonies and daily lives. Our languages are essential to our very identity as Indigenous peoples. Legislation recognizes that our languages are essential to the transmission of our cultures and traditional knowledge for future generations, including our values, histories, and worldviews. Bill C-91 acknowledges that discriminatory government policies and practices were detrimental to our languages and were key in the erosion of Indigenous languages. Bill C-91 also marks the first time that Canada has upheld Indigenous language rights as existing Aboriginal treaty rights as recognized in Section 35 of the Constitution Act 1982. So through this act, it's like we're filling up Section 35, and language rights are therein, Section 35. To have a full discussion regarding the pre-existing Aboriginal treaty rights, Indigenous perspectives and laws, case law must be considered. Cases such as Sparrow, Vanderpeet, Delgamuukw provide clear direction in that regard. And here's a quote from them. That courts must take into account the perspective of Aboriginal peoples themselves in assessing a claim for the existence of an Aboriginal right, and a court must take into account the perspective of the Aboriginal people claiming the right. It's from Vanderpeet. The proposed legislation is consistent with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action and the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, both of which are supported by First Nations and both of which Canada has pledged to honor and implement. The TRC calls to action number 13, 14, and 15. The UN Declaration, and these are the articles throughout the Declaration, Articles 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, 8, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 18, 20, 22, 23, 25 to 27, 31, 33, 34, 36, 37, 39, 40, and 42 to 46. We did encourage the elaboration of these articles in the body of the legislation, They're not yet included, but there's references to the UN Declaration. Indigenous peoples' languages qualify us for the right to self-determination as upheld in the UN Declaration, and language is a defining characteristic of our nationhood. I've always said it this way: 5 elements are needed for the inherent right to self-determination to be recognized, not only within the nation-state called Canada, but globally. Your own languages, your own lands, your own laws, your own people, and your own identifiable forms of government. So language is one of those 5. It's fundamental to our existence. This legislation, we say, commits the government to provide sufficient, sustainable, and long-term funding toward the revitalization of our languages. This legislation includes provisions to ensure the government consults with Indigenous governments and governing bodies to provide adequate, sustainable, and long-term funding for the reclamation, revitalization, maintenance, and strengthening of our languages. The purpose of this legislation responds to the need for multifaceted approaches. So we need schools on the reserve, as well in urban and rural settings, to create and implement effective bilingual and immersion education programs, beginning with preschool-age children. We need programs that inspire all of our people to speak our languages, regardless of age, to renew the vibrancy of our communities as our cultural places. And these approaches must be developed and driven by First Nations peoples. The level of financial investment will be substantial, and the need is immediate, including seeing the federal investment for language revitalization and related activities in this year's federal budget. Number 2, passing this legislation is important for Indigenous peoples and for all Canadians. 74% of Canadians were already found to be supportive of the development of an Indigenous Languages Act, according to a 2017 Nanos research survey. So it's good politics. To the Conservatives, to the NDP, and to the Liberals, this is good politics. Canadians want and see the need for this. It's good for everyone. You talk about this word reconciliation. This is it in action. So it's good. Everybody's supporting this. We say Canada must revisit its vision as multicultural, multilingual country in a way that includes the original peoples of this land. Canada as a nation was in part formed through nation-to-nation treaties. Indigenous languages were used in making of these treaties, and we can only fully understand our shared history with our ancestral Indigenous languages. We've met with Francophone representative organizations, and they understand the importance of the recognition and affirmation of our language rights. This legislation will not displace the rights of other language groups. It is part of recognizing Indigenous language rights because all languages matter. The health and socioeconomic benefits of knowing one's language and culture expand beyond the individual, building strong communities, stronger First Nations, and a stronger Canada. So people who acquire fluency at a young age are more successful in school and therefore more successful in life. So studies have shown that. You know who you are, where you come from. You're more successful in school. So think of this as even the business case that you're investing in the fastest growing segment of Canada's population, which is young First Nations men and women. And so you're going to have huge returns on investment in the future. This is the business case that can be made. If people can't get their head around fundamental human rights, our inherent rights, Aboriginal rights, or treaty rights, it makes sense. A culturally appropriate implementation of this legislation can help First Nations and Canadians heal from our shared history of residential schools. It's time to begin to reverse the damage of harmful policies, to reverse language loss. A healthier and stronger Canadian society embraces peace, diversity, respect, and inclusiveness. It's a society where everyone lives in freedom and dignity, and our strength lies in upholding these fundamental principles. The United Nations proclaimed 2019 the International Year of Indigenous Languages. So let's let Canada be an example of what it means to not only celebrate, but actively support Indigenous languages by passing this legislation, and furthermore, by supporting an international decade of Indigenous languages. Action is needed now because no Indigenous language in Canada is safe. The urgency of language revitalization cannot be understated, and we cannot stall. I acknowledge that there are some limitations to legislation. So how do we make sure we can move forward as soon as possible, considering the urgency of language revitalization? We can address improvements to the Act through this committee process. we always say nothing's perfect. Let's find ways to make things better. For example, the AFN advocated for an elaboration of the United Nations Declaration section in full. The language of the provision of adequate, sustainable, and long-term funding could also be strengthened. The matter of the delivery of federal government services in Indigenous languages is an expectation and right. The possible requirement for translation of documents and interpretation services, where requested in relation to federal institutions, would benefit from more clarity and strengthening as well. Canadian intellectual property law does not currently acknowledge and protect Indigenous languages as traditional knowledge and afford intellectual property rights. Participants in the national engagement sessions highlighted the need for this protection in the legislation. We need to make sure that we look after that information ourselves and it's not copyrighted by other institutions, whether they be academic or any other way. Okay? So First Nations are dedicated to our languages. A growing number of second language learners shows us that our young people care about their languages. Indigenous peoples and organizations will take the lead in reclaiming, revitalizing, maintaining, and strengthening our languages. Working on a co-development basis does not end here. Legislation could also clarify that First Nations need to be involved in the implementation, both before and following the entry into force of this Act. We must continue to work together in implementing the Indigenous Languages Act in a good way. To conclude, this legislation is a stepping stone for us all. This legislation is enabling. It is a means to meaningfully support and fund Indigenous initiatives led by Indigenous peoples to bring our languages back. And it means to regain our pride in our languages, regaining fluency, and make First Nations languages living languages by bringing them back into our homes, communities, and daily lives. This demonstration of good faith, we must put the same time and energy into revitalizing First Nations languages as Canada put in trying to eradicate them. The implementation of this legislation will be a major legacy to our children, who will be able to grow up learning and speaking their languages. Our languages, the original language of this land, can and should be once again be heard throughout Canada. To ensure this legacy, we're also pressing that 2019 not only be the International Year of Indigenous Languages, but the United Nations adopt an International Decade of Indigenous Languages in a timely manner.
Thank you very much. So the bells are going, and I had said that I was seeking unanimous consent to continue on. I'm looking at the clock, 23 minutes left. What I would propose is if we can try and go till about 9 minutes too, and that would let me have 2 questions in for 7 minutes, and then we'll come back right after the vote. Does that work for everyone? Perfect. So we will begin with Mr. Badaway for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome to our presenters. My first question is with respect to some of the efforts that are happening off reserve, as well as integrating, hopefully, some efforts with the expertise from on reserve to off reserve. In Niagara, we have a process called Landscape of Nations 360, and we've established 10 essential undertakings as we're moving forward with Indigenous education and then therefore languages. My question to you, Mr. Bellegarde, is with respect to, 1, finding out if we're in the right direction, and 2, trying to attach an action to the overall legislation to move it forward. Some of those areas or themes that we established was Indigenous peoples' cultures, including languages, time, continuity, and change, people, places, and environments, individual development and identity, individuals, groups, and institutions, power, authority, and governance, production, distribution, and consumption, nature, science, technology, and society, global connections, and civic ideals and practices, a lot of which what you discussed in your presentation. So my question to you is, to attach an action to this overall legislation, what would be some of your thoughts for both on reserve, but as well off reserve?
Good question. The whole idea of this act is to bring back fluency. That's the intention of this act. So in Canada, you've got 634 First Nations right across Canada. Over 1 million plus people, First Nations people. 90 Indigenous languages. So right across, like depending what territory you're from, right? It could Mi'kmaq, Maliseet, Pasquamawari, Mohawk, Dene, Cree, Tlingit, like Blackfoot, there's different nations and tribes. And your question is good because half of our people live on the res or in their communities and half live off as well. So the intention of this act, for example, the money's to be spent on things like preschool curriculum development, things like teacher training, mentor apprentice models, things like documentation and digitization. So it's really accessible, bilingual development. So those things can happen out on the reserves. But as well, half of our people live off reserves. And I have to be respectful as well, because in the Yukon Northwest Territories, there are no reserves. So we have to be mindful of our language so that everybody has access. But through the use of technology is a key piece to reach citizens, not only in Little Black Bear, but our memberships live in Regina, Saskatoon, Toronto, all right across Canada. So technology. There's also got to be an aspect of provincial government involvement as well, because it's the provinces that decide the curriculums. It's the provinces that can also make investments. And I lift up British Columbia as one example of where that provincial government put $50 million in Indigenous language revitalization in British Columbia. That's huge. So you got to look at technology, provincial government involvement, but as well embrace this concept from the Corbière decision. The Corbière decision, recent Supreme Court decision, whereby every First Nation citizen has the right to vote for their chief and council regardless of residency. So the chiefs represent all their membership, whether they live on or off their First Nations community. So because of that, there's going to become the issue of portability of services and programs, portability of rights, portability of services. So though between those three things, technology, provincial government involvement, and in even some cases, big city involvement, the municipalities and the governments in the big cities, but as well the extension of services and programs that the chiefs and councils themselves can look after their citizens. So between those three, you should be able to address that issue of how to get services and programs so people living off the community and territory.
Question, and a great answer, in particular as it relates to the recognition of those that are off reserve that want to participate. Having said that, again, going a bit deeper into those that would actually communicate the message, teachers, those that would bring the curriculums together. What we've done in our small part of the world is ensure that world studies, geography, history, civics, politics, all that's included at every level of grade, 9, 10, 11, 12, Canadian history. In your opinion, how would we facilitate, how would we encourage not just the students to be involved, but also those that would be the educators?
It's a good question again. Like, what has to happen? And there's got to be a greater focus as well on dealing with the provincial premiers and the provincial governments and territorial governments. And we've asked for curriculums to be changed to teach about Aboriginal rights and treaty rights in all the schools. For example, in Saskatchewan, it's law. You have to teach treaties in the classroom from kindergarten to grade 12. Then you also build on that the impact of the residential schools. Then you also build on that the impact of the Indian Act, which has been in place since 1876. So changing the curriculums. But that's a provincial government jurisdiction, if you will. So there's got to be a very concerted lobby effort at those levels. And it's starting to happen across Canada. But that's how you get the curriculums changed. Because again, focusing on the territory reserve is one jurisdictional piece, but a lot of our people reside off. And so you've got to have a two-pronged strategy. Federal government can do something, and they are through this act, but the provinces have a role as well to play. And so to address the issue there, that's one piece. But even go one step further, if these curriculums are changed and that these rights have to be taught from kindergarten to grade 12, well, what about these teachers coming out of these institutions that get their BEds and their teaching degrees, but those universities don't teach these teachers how to adequately teach about the spirit and intent of treaty? How to incorporate some of our ceremonies into these mainstream institutions in either the Catholic school, the public school, or the private schools. So you have to have that as well. Change your curriculums, but the universities and all their education faculties have to be brought up to speed and incorporate traditional knowledge and elders' knowledge as well at that level. So these young men and women coming out with their teaching degrees will know what it means about the spirit and intent to treaty. Like, for example, seed, these words, cede, surrender, and relinquish. I don't understand. I don't think Chief Little Black Bear understood in 1874. He never had a good legal counsel to explain what he was putting his 4 direction mark on that treaty. So the spirit and intent about sharing the land, the spirit and intent to a good education. All these things have to be taught. So curriculum changes, universities got to as well adapt.
And that brings
Thank
you to the
you.
end of your time. So we'll be going to Mr. Urdiga for 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Chief Belgrade, for coming here and expressing your opinions. And I agree with you totally. It has to be involved education, whether it's whether it's elementary or the university. There's got to be a holistic approach to this. There's many languages that are on the verge of collapsing. I heard some that are only 9 members that can speak the language. So urgency is paramount. So we got to start quickly. I know we can't do everything at once, but we have to do what we can to preserve what's there and to ensure future generations can enjoy the language and the culture. And I was told by one elder that culture and language is one of the same. You can't have one without the other. So in your perspective, when we talk about culture and language, they have to be taught together. I don't think you can separate them because you'll do a misjustice to one or the other. So, So can you give what do you think about the culture and language thing has to be together?
It's a direct link, and thank you for the question because they're linked. Like even in some cases, again, we're using English, this beautiful English language, and mais oui, je parle français un petit peu, speak a little French, 2 beautiful, wonderful languages. But I speak Cree a little bit as well. But it's important because in our ceremonies, in our lodges, when you pray, with the pipe, you're supposed to use your language, the gifts given to you by the Creator. And so that's a teaching from our elders. If you're in a Sundance Lodge or in a Sweat Lodge or in any kind of ceremony, we're supposed to use those gifts by the Creator. They're tied. Your language is tied to ceremony. Your culture, they're linked, inextricably linked. They can't be separated. And we say this way that what was given to us is good this way. And our old people said they would never disrespect the churches. You know, the churches are a good way. Go up to God. But that's what the Creator gave to these people over here. It's a good way. They would never say anything negative. But this way, our way, is not above this way, and this way is not above this way. But for years, the Residential Schools Union Act said our way is no good. You know, it's no good. And so now it's coming, that pride's coming back. And so that language is coming back. The ceremonies are coming back strong, and they're linked because that's what the Creator gave us. And so they're totally linked to whether you're and I go to ceremonies all across Canada. I had the big honor of being with the Angwahoy, the Haudenosaunee peoples, in their longhouse, and it's all Mohawk. Everything's Mohawk. Then I go to our lodges; it's all in Cree Sundance lodges. Go to the Sotos, Ojibwe. It's a big honor to see that, and that's one of the teachings. They're linked, so you have to have those two. It's to who you are. It's who we are, and you can't avoid it. You have to have them.
You know, I'm struggling with how do we do this in a post-secondary setting? I mean, obviously, we just can't have someone that has knowledge of the language or speak the language. But there also has to be the ability that someone that comes from the culture to be able to teach it correctly. So there's a challenge here, and I don't know what we can do to mitigate the challenges here. So do you have any idea how we can encourage, get people interested to go into become the teachers? But they have to be culturally linked, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, no, it's elders councils. Bring elders, knowledge keepers in. You know, they don't need to have a doctorate. They are our doctor. Our elders have that traditional knowledge, and they've earned that right to teach and pass on these things if it's done in a respectful way. So utilize elders councils, utilize traditional knowledge keepers, and incorporate that coming in.
You know, my niece and nephew, they learned Cree from the Kukum. They didn't learn from mom and dad. They learned it from the grandmother, the Kukum. So, you're right. There's so much opportunity to using the resources that are already available, which is the elders and grandmothers or Kukums, depending on how do you want to refer to your grandparents. But so, what would you like to see the initial steps? What should we do? What's off the bat? What should we concentrate on?
Pass this legislation before June. Make sure it receives royal assent. That's what this is all about. If we don't get it done by June, well, my goodness gracious, we've lost an opportunity. We don't know what's going to happen in October. And even if there's a continuation, there might be a change. We don't know, will anybody be supportive of another Indigenous Languages Revitalization Act? We don't know. So we miss an opportunity. So there's a sense of urgency to get this done now. Royal assent is very key.
I'll share the rest of my time with my colleague.
Minutes.
Less than 2 minutes? Oh, thank you, Madam Chair.
Generous.
Just quickly, and I know just what you said. Get it done, get it passed. But part of it, in a sense, is what's got to be built afterwards. And one of the things we've asked in the last panel and was how do you believe the funding mechanism? And we had a couple of different versions of witnesses saying one establishing another, one the bureaucracy talking about. What's your view of how this funding could flow?
Again, this was co-developed. The co-development and partnership does not stop with the passing of this Bill C-91. We would hope that the co-development of regulations and the implementation process will continue so we can address exactly what you're saying. What's the most effective and efficient way to get these out that's going to have real impact, locally, regionally, even nationally? And so we have to look at that. And you have to also respect parliamentary privilege. There's a budgeting cycle every year. But within this bill, it's three places it's referenced for funding. Mm-hmm. You know, that's unheard of in any kind of legislation. So it's strong. It can be strengthened, no question, but you have to respect the process. There's a federal budget every year. Every year. And so we want to make sure that these resources get out for exactly what we talked about earlier on, the teacher training, the master apprentice model, the digitization, the capturing of it, right? And it's going to be local, regional, national in some cases, and have a flexible approach in each territory and province. So it's going to vary, but I think that's going to be co-developed in the implementation piece. So this is just the first step, the legislative drafting piece, get this done, but the regulations, the implementations, the work continues after in co-development.
And that brings you to the end of your time. It's also when I'm going to be suspending. If I can ask, I'm going to suspend and then ask the MPs to just sit for 1 second for me to ask you one thing after we suspend. So we are suspended. There you go. start again, continue our meeting. We are continuing with the first part of the meeting with National Chief Perry Bellegarde and Roger Jones, a special advisor to the National Chief at the Assembly of First Nations. What I propose is we will do another round to kind of finish off our questions, and we will start with our second set of witnesses a bit late, just to make up for the time that we lost on the vote. So, we will be, I think we were at Monsieur Nantel, est-ce que c'est vous ou Madame Jolibois?
Madame Jolibois.
For 7 minutes, please.
7 minutes. Thank you very much, Chief Bellegarde and Roger, Mr. Jones. Thank you for coming. It's a very important day today, and this is a very important discussion. I do have 2 questions. Last night, we heard from First Peoples Cultural Council that in addition to an Indigenous Languages Commissioner, there should be a National Indigenous Languages Organization that will be at arm's length from the government. The idea would be that it could protect funding and languages programming from political interference. Is that an idea that you would support?
Good question. And I always lift up the people that are doing good work. You know, Tracy Herbert and her First Peoples Cultural Center from BC. Out of the 58 plus languages in Canada, there's 34, and they're in British Columbia. And so they know what they're doing. So I lift them up and hold my hands up to them and thank them for their good work. In terms of this idea of a national institute, we always break it down local, regional, national. Sometimes, you know, is this the most effective way to bring back fluency? It's a possibility. It's a possibility. Again, I'd look to the language experts to do that. But in our consultations, a lot of the people said, we need the money out in the communities, out in the territories, right? That's where people were saying the priority should be focused on. But having said that, when you start looking at national institutions, you think about, and this is something, I made my little notes here, a commission. What's the role of a commission? Well, it's for oversight. You know, a national institute. Well, it's ensure that there's sharing of wise practices if there's a national institute. Or what about a foundation? A national foundation. So it's raising and awarding of monies or resources. So there's 3 different things, depending on, again, the role, function, responsibility. So we're hearing something very clearly from Tracy. It's one recommendation. All things should be explored. The intention I want people to keep focused on, one is the need to get this done by June. And then 2, to look at ways in the co-development on the implementation of the regulations and everything else coming afterwards for the most effective way to bring back fluency, locally, regionally, and nationally.
And another question is related to funding. I'm still learning about from the legislation, and then there's still some questions around funding. My main concern is that at the provincial level, provincial and municipalities, we know that population, First Nations, they're on reserve, and we know that, like us, we live in an urban to municipalities. So my thinking, my thing is that, and it's not clear to me, this is why I'm asking you if you can help clarify, in your discussions for funding, when it comes to funding, these organizations, be it some educational institutions like FNUC, and then the Dene Teacher Education Program, and then municipalities that made for the Métis and the non-status, and some First Nation who live in municipalities, preschools are examples, right? Cultural centers and Indigenous organizations, or even elders who live in our communities, to ensure that they have access to funding as well as is our on reserve, as well as the Métis settlements and the Métis governments. Have you had those discussions and advocated strongly for them as well?
Good question, Georgina, and Masicho for that question. Earlier on, I made comments, and it came from a gentleman on this side of the room, I believe, that talked about how do you get services and programs, not only on reserve, but I also have to be mindful in terms of terminology, because in the Northwest Territories and the Yukon there aren't reserves, right? So this has got to be respectful, mindful. But for ease of discussion, half our people live on reserves, half live off. So I made the point earlier on about the need and use of technology to make sure that everybody has access to these services and programs, right? Whether you're on the reserve or off reserve. But as well, I talked about the need for provincial government involvement as well.
Right.
This is federal government, but the role of the provinces, because they control the curriculums, and they also have monies transferred from the feds for three things: education, healthcare, and social services through EPF financing. So there's a role for provincial governments as well, and I lifted up the BC government for providing $50 million for Indigenous language revitalization. And so there's a role for provincial governments as well. And then I also made the point about the Corbière decision. And the Corbière decision is where, regardless of residency, you have the right to vote for your chief and council. And so now there's going to be a reasonable expectation that the portability of services and programs, that we say, I'm not just a treaty Indian just because I live on Little Black Bear. You know, the portability of services and programs should follow. And that would be also in this case. So making sure resources are out there, the community, but the chiefs and councils, we're going to have a responsibility to look after the membership and citizenship regardless of residency. So technology, use of provincial government involvement as well, and then to respect that First Nations jurisdiction and off regarding looking after their citizens' needs, whether it be for housing, education, or in this case, language revitalization.
How are we going to ensure the provincial involvement, especially with governments like Saskatchewan, Scott Moe, Pallister in Manitoba, Ontario, Doug Ford, and then even Alberta might, there's a possibility, Mr. Kenney. How are we going to make sure that they say yes and support this?
Well, two pieces, Georgina. Well, a very strategic lobby effort, advocacy effort by leadership in each of those respective provinces and territories. That's one. And in fact, in this legislation in Article 9, there's provision for relationships and partnerships as well with other levels of government. So there's provisions for that there. So that'd be my response there. But it really becomes incumbent upon chiefs and leadership right across Canada to as well not only exert pressure on the policy and legislative makers, decision makers nationally, but provincially as well. And I used the example earlier on about how in Saskatchewan it's law to teach treaties in the classroom from kindergarten to grade 12 in the curriculums. It's legislated, it's law. So that came about from a very strategic lobby effort, advocacy effort to do that. And so two fronts have to happen. Just what I mentioned. So that's the way of addressing that. And there is provision in here to make that happen as well in terms of partnerships and relationships with other levels of government.
Okay.
Your time, and we are now going to Mr. Oliphant for 7 minutes, please.
Thank you. And thank you, National Chief. I'm not a regular member of this committee. I'm substituting today, and so it's a great privilege to be here on something I actually care quite a bit about. First, I wanted to ask a technical question, whether or not this report in our kit on the National Engagement Sessions report has been submitted to the committee to be used in evidence. And if it hasn't, I would like it to be considered. I've had a chance to skim it while others have been talking. And if it would be agreed, we could submit it formally to the committee so it could be used in their report. So that's okay, Chair?
Yes.
So that, and Clerk, that'll be considered a formal document, so you don't have to get everything in, because a lot is in that engagement report. I'd like to take a little bit of time to dig down into sort of the difference between reclamation and revitalization. And I think it's a really important thing. And I'm glad in our second hour we'll hear from Sija, because my first trip to Israel, I had studied Biblical Hebrew. And Biblical Hebrew was really a dead language. It was a closed set of terms, ideas, religion, religious words, and it had to be revitalized to become a living language based on the roots. And it seems to me that for many of the languages, maybe all of them, we need to not only reclaim, but we really need to revitalize. And that means finding the terminology to live in the 21st century. And I'm wondering if you have some ideas of what else that will take. We've had a few ideas that have come up already in the committee, but I think it would be important to talk about local, provincial, territorial, national, educational, curricular, teachers, knowledge keepers and elders, but also academics. So there's a lot of things that need to be in there. And it's a bit of a shopping list. I want to give you a chance to get a bit into the committee about what it would really mean to revitalize the language.
Well, very good question. And the whole idea behind the act is to bring back fluency. And in our case, as First Nations people, like we say, anywhere from 58 to 90 languages across Canada. And they're all at different stages. None of them are safe. None of them are going to, we're going to always have Cree here, or Dene here, or Blackfoot. None of them are safe. So you have to assess where each one is at. And then you apply a different strategy as to where that's at. So in some cases, you might have only 1 or 2 or 3 speakers left. So that's where the digitization or your capturing of that. You know, for example, we have 634 reserves across Canada. There's 1 Lakota First Nation reserve. And I always do this test. Where do you think that is? There's out of all of our reserves, our reservations in Canada, over 1 million First Nations people. There's one. I always say, you ever watch Dances with Wolves? Well, yeah, they're speaking Lakota, you know. And so there's 1 out of all our reserves. Little Black Bear is not it. But there's a small reserve in southern Saskatchewan called Wood Mountain. And they're part of the Lakota Nation, part of the Lakota tribe. Out of 634, they're Lakota. So you can't exclude or forget them either. And there's not very many fluent speakers. And so again, you use a different strategy for the Lakota peoples, right? So it depends on where each language is at in terms of what strategy you use to bring about fluency. So and I mentioned earlier on documentation or digitization, capturing it. I mentioned master apprentice or mentor apprentice model, you know, to make sure people bring back fluency. Teacher training in schools, immersion programs. It's all about having the necessary resources. So we're hyped up about this piece of legislation because it ensures there's statutory funding in place. And then you use the appropriate strategy depending on the state of that language. That's the simplest way to put it.
And the reason I really dwell on it, I lived in Yukon for a number of years, and there were 2 Tagish speakers left. Mm-hmm. Just 2 at that time. I don't believe there are any now. But in the schools, the language they were learning was about life on the trap line. Mm-hmm. It was about a way of life that was part of Indigenous life, but a subset of their life. There weren't words about the things the kids were doing, which was they were gaming, they were involved in all kinds of things in their social lives and their technological lives, all kinds of stuff. So it's even, you know, if we sit at the level of, you know, in Yukon was 1900 was where the language sort of froze. How do we do that? I know it'll be unique for everyone, but I think I guess what I'm baiting you is to try to say this needs money.
Yes.
And it needs a concerted 4 levels of government activity. Mm-hmm. It needs Indigenous governments, it needs local governments with school boards, provinces and territories, and the federal government. And I don't want you to be shy about saying that to this committee. Today we had almost unanimous consent on the second reading. It'll go on the third. On third reading, we will get that. And that is, you know, it's interesting because when I have been in Nunavut and in Greenland, Greenlandic is so close to Nunavut that a lot of the linguistics of the two are so related that this is also international. Mm-hmm. It is, I mean, they get the Lakota speakers from the United States helping. And so it's not only our 4 levels. I just want you to get on record and push that when we get unanimous consent at third reading, it's not just passing a bill, it's establishing reconciliation in terms of the way we are going to move ahead on this. And
I would gladly say, for the record, you need all levels of government and institutions working in partnership to bring back fluency. The goal is fluency. We do not want any more of our First Nations languages to be gone the way and to be lost. And so that's the goal of this bill. And I think, and I mentioned earlier on that 74% of Canadians want this as well, about revitalization and focusing on Indigenous languages to bring it back. And I even say it this way, and I've said this earlier on, that if you can't get your head around human rights or treaty rights or Aboriginal rights, this makes sense because studies have shown that when you're fluent in your language, you're more successful in school and therefore more successful in life. And the fastest growing segment of Canada's population are young First Nations men and women. So even this is, the old people used to say, no son, grandson, we walk in 2 worlds. You need 2 systems of education now. And I used to ask, what are they talking about? You know, I always thought kindergarten to grade 12, math and science, literacy, numeracy, go to university, technical vocational skills training on one hand. Yeah, we get that. But equally important are your languages and your ceremonies and your traditions and your culture and who you are, where you come from. You need both now. As a Nehewak person, or a Anishinaabe person, or a Mi'kmaq person, or a Haudenosaunee Angwahoe person, it's balanced because for years and hundreds of years, the residential schools messages to our people were your languages are no good, your ceremonies are no good, your culture are no good. It's coming back now, and there's a pride. And if you start using that word reconciliation, it's incumbent upon not all levels of government, all Canadians to embrace this and see this going forward. And so it's really incumbent upon that.
Can I just make my closing comment would be to thank the AFN for your advocacy work on this, that I don't think we would have got here without a generation of advocacy work that you have been doing. So thank you.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Alors maintenant, nous allons, Monsieur Blaney, c'est à vous pour 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Madame. Mr. Blaney, you have the floor for 5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome, Chief Bellegarde. I wasn't here at the very beginning of of the committee, so I missed your opening comments. However, I'm very pleased. My colleagues have informed me that we've passed second reading of the bill, and we've already gained a bit of time. So the bill has been accepted in a large sense. Very constructive debate. And yes, the importance of identity, cultural identity, and it's very, very important. Science and math, STEM, very important. But who we are, where we're going, language, and as a Quebecois, I find language a very vital and important thing for my culture. And we're very, very proud to support this bill. I'd like to talk numbers with you a little bit, if we might, Mr. Bellegarde, Chief Bellegarde. Minister Rodriguez was before the committee yesterday. He indicated that there was some discussion and negotiations with the AFN and the Métis on the budgetary envelopes for the implementation of this bill. My first question is quite straightforward. Have you had conversations with the minister on this necessary budget envelope for the implementation of this bill?
And, as I understand it, did we have conversations with the minister regarding the budgetary, the piece, the finance piece? And formally, they're going to begin tomorrow, because we had a co-development process, and we all had reps around the co-development table. The gentleman to my right, a lot of experience in co-developing federal legislation, going back to the specific claims tribunal. So he said, and he's fluent in Ojibwe. He has that experience. He's legal counsel. We sit there, Roger. He's going to be our rep from AFN. So it's formally going to start tomorrow on the financing pieces, because this is the important piece of work now, that we don't stop just because the legislation's been co-developed. You have to co-develop implementation processes and mechanisms as well, and even getting down to the details in terms of the financing that's required every fiscal year. We call that very important man, Sunya Ogimao. Some of you will know what that means. The big money chief. That's Bill Morneau. Right now. He's the one that's very important for every federal department, right? Including Minister Rodriguez in terms of what's put into that department for this area. So that's how we want to work it. Details, putting those plans in place. But we recognize every fiscal year there's a federal budget. Okay. And we have to influence that every cycle.
Okay. Merci, monsieur. Merci, chef.
Thank you very much, Chief. It's not exactly what the minister told us. He said some discussions had already occurred. Initially, the federal government had put forward $5 million. It's not much, but in the last budget, there's 5 to 30 million, or well, 5 million, but over 30 million over 5 years. There's already been an announcement made of $30 million for the next 3 years. And the minister did advise us that after discussions with yourself, he was going to come back with a new budgetary envelope. We also had representatives from British Columbia who did confirm the $50 million that was put to the development of language and culture in BC. So my next question, Chief Bellegarde, you spoke to Ms. Jolibois, portability. Is there any way that we can twin that concept, if you could explain it to us, twin that for Indigenous people who are in various communities with the bill? Can we apply the concept of portability to this bill?
Again, I made earlier comments about the portability of services and programs, and we want to ensure that the services and programs can be obtained from regardless of residency. And there's three things I said. You can use technology. You can also exert the pressure on provincial and territorial and municipal governments as well, based on the comment that all governments have an obligation. And then because of the Corbière decision, we have the right to vote for our chiefs and councils regardless of residency. So there's an expectation at some point there will be services, the portability of services and programs to follow. That's three elements. And then as well within the legislation, number 6, the Government of Canada recognizes that the rights of Indigenous peoples recognized and affirmed by Section 35 Constitution Act include rights related to Indigenous languages. So they're constitutional rights. There's also provision in number 9, I believe, Roger, about partnerships with provincial governments as well.
OK. OK. Je vous remercie beaucoup, chef. Merci.
Thank you very much, Chief Bellegarde. Thank you.
And we will now go to Mr. Hogue for 5 minutes. It's our final 5 minutes.
Oh, thank you very much for your submissions and comments. If I can summarize what I think I'm hearing and see whether or not you can mark me on this, that you're talking firstly about, I think you said 4 or 5 times, there's a sense of urgency and need with respect to this and the need to get this through by the end of June. And you've talked about the need for or the reason for that urgency is that no languages are safe and you don't want to move on to uncertainties. I think I heard that really quite clearly. You also said no legislation is perfect and nothing is, but there was a need that you felt that there was a certain amount of agreement with the legislation that is here. In previous testimonies that we've heard, we've looked at some of those issues that may in fact be looked at and are changed. The sections 1 through 11, as I read them, are more value statements. They're the principles. They talk a little bit about organizational structure, but they lay out the broad framework of what we want to achieve. They're referring to the United Nations, UNDP. They refer to the Constitution and a number of issues that go through that. Sections 12 through 30 talk about the Office of the Commissioner of Indigenous Languages and the directors that will come with that. And I think that's where I would see a lot of the flexibility or a lot of the interpretation. You've made reference a number of times to being able to respond to the local nuances and needs of the geographic area and the people that live in those areas. And then I think sections 31 through 42 talk about a shared responsibility and the implementation of that need for flexibility. Are you, if I'm fairly accurate to this point, then I'm asking if you would then agree that the values that are reflected in it are appropriate values, that they do provide the foundation, and that the Office of the Commissioner will have the ability to make those decisions in, we don't know who the commissioner will be or who the directors of that will be. They will be, we believe they will be representative of Indigenous communities and be from Indigenous communities and be able to do that. So my concern in legislation in the past has been that we put too much into the legislation and we're not able to respond to the nuances and needs as things change. So I'm just testing whether or not you would agree with or correct me in those areas where I'm seeing this wrongly, or whether or not that is a fair interpretation of what I've heard in your testimony.
No, it's a good question, Mr. Hogg, and I think that the principles and values are there quite clear, and you broke it down really well. 1 to 11, principles and values, the details, commissioners and directors, and we had a debate, or I still have a debate. Should we have a commissioner for the Cree? That's 1 out of the 58. How about a commissioner for the Teslin Tlingit? That's another one. What about one for the Dene? That's another one. There's so many. But again, what's their role? We don't want to take away from the focus. The focus is fluency, and that's what we have to keep our minds and hearts on. And then the flexible approach from region to region, no question. The function of these commissioner and directors were one of reporting and monitoring. That's what their function was to be. And so, again, reporting and function, like initially in my mind, the word they used, were we going to have this commissioner, i.e. like an office of parliament, like the Auditor General, or the Privacy Commissioner, or the other these are offices of parliament. And this one, as you can see in the Act, is not like that yet. Maybe, but it's starting with something for monitoring, reporting back. As it reports to the minister, then the minister has to make this report available to the 338 MPs, right? It's different. So the whole role, again, I break it down to roles, responsibility, authorities, and powers and functions. And for the commission role, it was just one of monitoring and reporting back. And that, remember, this legislation, there's 5-year reviews. Again, if things aren't perfect, you're going to get this done by the end of June. Let's start it and build upon it. If something's not working, we have a process to review and make it better. But the whole objective is statutory funding to make sure as well that these programs and policies and procedures that are going to be put in place bring back fluency. That's the objective. And so the way you set it up, yeah, I agree with the way you set it up. But the principles and the values are key.
If you were
15 seconds.
if you were to make one piece of change in the legislation, or is there anything you would change at this point, or given the urgency, would you leave it just the way it is?
I've made some recommendations in my earlier comments, and so you can refer back to those, in terms of how to make it better.
Thank you very
I
much.
love how concise that was. Thank you very much. And so thank you very much to both of you. Thank you. I'd like to echo Mr. Oliphant's comments. Thank you for your advocacy on this, and thank you for being patient with us when we went to vote. But I'm very happy that the bill is now coming to us.
Sir, everybody, thank you so much from me.
Yeah, thank you. And
Thank
we're going
you.
to suspend briefly.
Even Hunter.
Okay, we'll suspend briefly while we just change over our panels. start up again. Thank you for everyone's patience again and the witnesses. Now, on the screens you have seen for the past 20 minutes, Professor Dwight Newman, Professor of Law and Canada Research Chair in Indigenous Rights at the University of Saskatchewan. So thank you for hanging out with us for the past 20 minutes on the screen. And we have with us present Richard Marceau and Alison Grant from the Center of Israel and Jewish Affairs, Erev Tov. Good to have you here. What we will do is we will start with a video conference just in case we end up with any technical issues. So if we could please start with you, Professor Newman, for your presentation.
All right. Well, good evening. My name is Dwight Newman. I'm a professor of law and Canada Research Chair in Indigenous Rights in Constitutional and International Law at the University of Saskatchewan. I carry on a broad-based program of research on Indigenous rights, constitutional law, and international law, and I serve in a variety of related policy roles, including as a Monk Senior Fellow of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, and as a member of the International Law Association Committee on the Implementation of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I appear before the committee as an individual in response to an invitation I received last week, and I'm pleased to assist the committee in whatever ways I can as it considers Bill C-91. In my introductory remarks, I will do two things. One, I want to highlight the importance of supporting Indigenous languages and why the goals of this bill should attract support from all sides. And two, I want to highlight a number of specific sections in the bill to think about or ask further questions about in order to try to enact the best bill feasible. First, then, I want to highlight that the scholarly literature on language rights generally references many factors that make initiatives on this subject an urgent matter. Language is not just a means of communication, important though that is, but it is also a vehicle of culture and cultural survival, a support for social solidarity and self-worth of different communities, and a means of conserving concepts and values highlighted within different worldviews that bring a variety of perspectives on our shared quest for meaning in human life. Supporting Indigenous languages is about supporting human communities, kinship networks, families, and individuals. In the Canadian context, it is also a vital response to tragic errors of the past, insofar as the residential school system tore apart families and communities and caused severe damage to Indigenous cultures and languages. The 2008 Canadian government apology for residential schools was a vital moment in reconciliation, but apologies must carry through to action, and in this case, action that seeks to restore families, communities, and cultures. Supporting Indigenous languages is an urgent policy initiative. Second, I want to turn to this specific bill and highlight a number of questions the committee may wish to consider. This legislation has come to Parliament at a particular stage in time, and there are some resulting dangers in the kind of quick consideration it could end up getting. But we must all do the best we can in giving this bill the close attention it deserves in the limited time available. So I'm going to highlight a number of questions I think the committee might wish to consider, and very specific questions about sections of the bill, but I hope that that will be helpful from a legal perspective. The definitions section in section 2 of the bill does not define the term Indigenous languages, but that term is used elsewhere in the bill, quite obviously. And I would raise the question of whether there should be a provision for a schedule of Indigenous languages adopted via regulation so that there can be clarity on which languages the Commissioner is to be focused upon, which could be developed obviously in conjunction with the Commissioner and in consultation on an ongoing basis with Indigenous peoples in Canada. Several other terms that appear elsewhere in the Act are also undefined in Section 2. The terms Indigenous peoples, Indigenous governing bodies, and Indigenous organizations are all defined in Section 2. However, other terms used in the bill, the terms Indigenous groups, Indigenous communities, and Indigenous governments are used elsewhere in the bill, but are not defined in Section 2. And I would just invite the committee to think whether there are any difficulties that could arise from that. Jumping ahead to a related piece of the bill in Section 25, I do want to highlight that the bill says that the Commissioner can provide funding to Indigenous communities or Indigenous governments or Indigenous governing bodies, those specific terms. Given the terminology of the bill, there's an implicit but clear exclusion of Indigenous organizations, another term appearing in the bill. And Indigenous organizations would include bodies that operate in urban areas. And the question here is simply, is Parliament clear that it intends to exclude urban Indigenous organizations from the possibility of receiving funding directly from the office? And that's just a question to be clear upon. Returning to earlier in the bill, Section 6 includes a legislative recognition of what is included in Section 35 of the Constitution Act 1982. I'm personally on record as agreeing with the substantive view expressed in Section 6 as to what's in Section 35, and I personally would also defend the role of legislatures in constitutional interpretation, but my view on the latter point is certainly not shared by all. I would urge the committee to think carefully on Parliament's view of whether a sort of section like Section 6 is appropriate as part of a legislative enactment as a section rather than as part of a preamble, for example. I cannot find a precedent like Section 6 in other legislation. Someone may be able to point to one, but using search terms to try to identify one, I've not found one. You may wish to consider whether there is a separation of powers issue on the legislature pronouncing on the interpretation of a section of the Constitution in place of the courts doing so. And you may also wish to consider if there's a federalism issue in the federal parliament pronouncing on a constitutional matter that also ultimately affects the provinces and trying to do that through federal legislation. In Section 7, I would highlight that the English and French versions of the bill do not seem entirely consistent, at least as compared to other Indigenous rights-related documents from the Government of Canada and the terms used in those documents to express the same meanings in English and in French. The French term en vue de, as found in the French version of this bill, is elsewhere found alongside an English term with the aim of. The English version here, in order that, is usually found alongside a French term afin de. The terms at issue can actually have different legal meanings, and the English version of Section 7 of this bill uses language that some in other contexts end up arguing implies the achievement of the substantive result that follows the term. And I know I'm being technical here, but this is legislation that's going to be a statute. I do not entirely agree with that view that it has that implication, but it can be argued. And if the bill is passed as is, there may end up being credible litigation that argues that the English version of Section 7 implies a funding obligation, although the French version is much less supportive of that result. I know people have a variety of views on what the Section 7 obligation should be, but it's appropriate that there be consistency achieved as between the English and French versions, and that Parliament understand clearly what it is or is not committing to with the terminology ultimately adopted in Section 7.
Professor
On
Newman?
one other matter.
Sorry, I just wanted to jump in to just give you a heads up that you are now at your time. So if you can wrap it up, you can have another minute maybe to wrap it up and bring out the rest in questions.
I'm sorry to run over time. I'll just raise the question of whether the construction of Section 24 on research that may be undertaken by the office is actually too tightly framed. The use of specific examples in the subparts will tend to limit the interpretation of the general language in the chapeau provision in the section. So I raise the question whether the research that may be undertaken by the office is constrained, perhaps even so much so that it can't gather the pertinent information to present its mandatory annual report as required by Section 43 sub 1. So again, I would urge the committee to consider those matters on drafting. There are challenging matters on the specifics. The bill obviously reflects an important process and important goals that are part of reconciliation. At the same time, while I hope that the bill will draw broad support from everyone, hopefully also all will hopefully work to make the best of the bill that's feasible in the context of the time to consider it. And I'll of course try to help in respect of any further questions you may wish to pose.
Thank you. So we will now go to CIJA, the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Bonsoir. Ma collègue Alison Grant et moi.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And my colleague and I, Alison Grant, are quite happy to be speaking on this bill, the C-91. The Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, CIJA, is the advocacy agent of the Jewish Federation of Canada. We're a national, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization representing the perspectives of 150,000 Canadian Jews affiliated through local federations.
Is involved in the issue of the revitalization of Indigenous languages. Why is it one of CIJA's priorities? CIJA works to ameliorate the quality of life of not only Canadian Jews, but of every Canadian. As a human rights organization, we believe in Canada's foundational values of freedom, justice, democracy, and equality for all. We are committed to working with governments and all like-minded groups to ensure that Canada is a country where all citizens, irrespective of gender, race, or creed, enjoy equal protections and opportunities. The issue of revitalization of Indigenous languages is an issue not only for Indigenous peoples, but for all Canadians, and for the entire world. This is why CIJA was honored and humbled to be a guest of the Assembly of First Nations at the United Nations in New York for the launch of the International Year of Indigenous Languages earlier this month. The friendship that exists between the Indigenous and Jewish communities in Canada is not new, but spans many events and extends over the course of many years. For example, in 2015, CIJA offered a statement of solidarity with Indigenous peoples on behalf of 6 Jewish organizations following the release of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action.
Recently, the issue of Indigenous language revitalization in the TRC report resonated with us. As Jews, we know the importance of language. A language is not only a means of communication, it carries with it history, culture, and identity, past, present, and future. Dr. Pamela Sirote-Cote, whose doctoral research at the University of San Francisco focused on Breton language and identity, once noted, because, and I quote, because language discloses cultural and historical meaning, the loss of language is a loss of that link to the past. Without a link to the past, people in a culture lose a sense of place, purpose, and path. One must know where one came from to know where one is going, unquote. Like Indigenous peoples, the Jewish people know firsthand the truth of that statement. A little over a century ago, Hebrew, the indigenous language of the Jewish people, was considered, and Mr. Oliphant made reference to it, by the world to be dormant, if not dead, confined to the religious texts and spoken prayers of the synagogue. En 1890, la communauté juive vivant à l'endroit se...
In 1890, the Jewish community living in what is now Israel took the bold step of establishing a Hebrew language committee that declared, and I will quote, to prepare Hebrew language for the use as a spoken language in all facets of life, in the home, school, public life, businesses, industry, fine arts, and the sciences.
This language of the Jewish people, Hebrew, should be restored in the indigenous land of the Jewish people. It launched an intensive program to transform Hebrew from a language of religious texts and ritual into one of daily life. By the time that Israel was established in 1948, the broad renaissance the community envisioned had come to fruition. Whereas biblical Hebrew consists of roughly 7,000 words, modern Hebrew now encompasses around 33,000 words. Ainsi que l'observait l'auteur hébraïque Yehuda Burla,
as was observed by the Hebrew writer Yehuda Burla, the very foundation of each and every nation is a national tongue. For Israelis, the revitalization of Hebrew was pivotal to the rebirth of the Jewish nation, and for the diaspora, including the Canadian Jewish community, the restoration of Hebrew to the center of the Jewish experience has dramatically enriched the identity of Jews worldwide. Today, it's not only in our religious ceremonies where one hears Hebrew, even in Canada. Jews around the world are connecting to their roots by studying Hebrew as a key accessing to the vibrant world of modern Jewish culture.
The best shows of Netflix are in Hebrew. If you want suggestions after, come and talk to me. I'll give you some. The revitalization of Hebrew has permanently changed the global Jewish experience. And while the situation of indigenous languages in Canada is somewhat different from that of Hebrew, we believe similar consequences can follow from the adoption of Bill C-91.
This cause is all the more urgent given evidence of the disappearance of Indigenous languages in Canada and around the world. UNESCO notes that nearly half of the world's 6,000 languages are endangered. The organization's list of vulnerable languages includes 87 Indigenous languages in Canada. 32 are designated as critically endangered. According to Statistics Canada, the proportion of the Indigenous population able to converse in an Indigenous language dropped from 21% to 15% in just 10 short years between 2006 and 2016. This must be reversed, and C91 is an important step in that direction. This historic bill was co-developed by the Assembly of First Nations, with whom CIJA is honored to work with in support of this vital initiative. Immense credit is owed to the AFN for its years of hard work and persistence in advancing this cause, culminating in C91.
Now, to build on the collaborative co-development process of the legislation, the bill recognizes that, quote, Indigenous peoples are best placed to take the leading role in reclaiming, revitalizing, maintaining, and strengthening Indigenous languages, end quote. Indeed, they are the only ones who can do so. Ce sentiment trouve écho à d'autres endroits dans le projet de loi, tel que l'article 5B.
This estimate is echoed in other places in the bill, Section 5B, Section 7, Section 23, and 25. It's a key benefit of the Act that it compels the Government of Canada to support appropriate approaches developed and driven by Indigenous peoples and remains central to implementation. And while the process will be rightly developed and led by Indigenous communities, the federal government has a vital supporting role to play. This is why they should be adopted without delay. Once passed, sufficient, sustainable, and long-term funding must be ensured to commit it to it in the 14th. Whereas we have to put the same amount into the protecting and revitalizing of these languages as put into eradicating them.
Will pave the way for a comprehensive set of language immersion and cultural programs across the country, developed and led by Indigenous communities. Canada's Jewish community stands ready to support this historic initiative in any way possible, and we urge you as parliamentarians from all parties to support the rapid passage of C91. Merci.
Thank you. So I have two questions for the committee before we go to questions. My plan was to end at 8. Which was, I was going to ask if we could reduce it to a 5-minute round for the round. The other thing that will bring us to just past 8, if everyone is okay, is that I've had a request from Mr. Tutu if he can have a 5-minute question period as well. So if I can have the consent from the committee to add that 5-minute in, that'll bring us to just after 8. Parfait, merci. So on that, we will start with Mr. Hogue at 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Mr. Newman, you mentioned there were some things that you weren't going to get time to get to. If I gave you another minute and a half, would you be able to do that? He's not listening to me.
Mute. You're probably a mute.
You're on mute.
Can I come off of mute?
Yeah, you're not. You did.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't hear to whom that was directed. I actually moved quickly through the additional matters that I was raising. I think that I addressed all of them quickly. The one that I was speaking to near the end concerned Section 24, and I would just highlight briefly there that the way in which that section is constructed in terms of a provision and then an inclusion of things within it has a danger of potentially restricting the broader term to a greater extent than it might be under some other formulation. And so that was the point that I was going to end on, and then I did just a quicker conclusion.
Thank you. Both of the witnesses, or all three of the witnesses, have made reference to the appropriateness of developing public policy and legislation, which has an element of input and role of implementation from those who it most affects. And certainly we've seen the process for the development of this stage that has been done to a considerable detail. I'm going to share some of my time with Mr. Elephant, and I think that Mr. Marceau and Ms. Grant have reinforced what we've already heard, and I think said that and given us another context to look at that, and I found that most helpful. Thank you so much for that. And then the detail, Mr. Oliphant, in terms of the questions that Mr. Newman has put forward, I'm going to turn over to you because you're a detail guy and I'm all concept.
So thank you, Professor. It's helpful. I want to give you a chance. First of all, if you have anything else in writing that you think would be helpful for the committee to consider, now that the bill has passed its second reading, I think it's always very helpful to have someone with a different set of eyes other than the Legislative Council or the drafters here to offer that in writing. And I think that could be helpful for the committee as well, because our goal as parliamentarians is to make the best legislation. We don't make perfect legislation, but we make the best legislation. And especially if there's issues of language or definitions that you think could be helpful, I think those are both important. So thank you. I want to ask you a little bit about the relationship, and this changes from your testimony, the relationship between language and the administration of justice. It's a little bit different than what you were talking about, but the role of language in courts, the role of language in ensuring that people have access to justice, and whether you have any comments you wanted to share with the committee on that, because we don't just revitalize languages for the sake of language. We revitalize them for their use to help to make our world better. So you might have any comments on that.
Languages for the sake of languages, but for the sake of the communities that they support. And I would see that as the broad aim of revitalizing languages. Certainly, it may be pertinent in the context of access to justice and the courts as well. Within the court system, of course, there are charter rights in relation to translation of proceedings that are available when needed within at least the criminal justice context. That doesn't solve a broader access to justice issue, though, in terms of the provision of services leading up to the court proceedings that would be available in languages, of a variety of different languages. And certainly that's an effort to which all governments could direct themselves in seeking to build opportunities for access to justice and the availability of advice and legal support to individuals in a variety of different languages, including obviously Indigenous languages.
I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, except I do. And it has to do with when I worked as a prison chaplain in the North, and the number of people who were incarcerated who were First Nations, Indigenous people, was high. And I was convinced as I met with them and talked to them that their capacity at language or lack thereof had actually put them in jail when they shouldn't be in jail. And I was quite convinced that if we don't restore and revitalize language, we will continue with incarceration at too high rates. And I just wonder if you have any insights into that. I know it's not quite your field.
Well, I have no doubt that there are instances where this becomes an issue, and you may have seen many of them. I don't disagree with anything you've said there, but I also think it would be overly ambitious to expect that from this particular legislation right now.
Cut you there then. I apologize because you are out of time, but I think that that's a good place that you can just end it right there. And we will be going to Mr. Shields for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I will follow up on that same line of questioning in a sense. So what do you believe that rights means for what has been indicated of 90 possible Indigenous languages? What is your definition, or what would you believe for rights for those 90 Indigenous languages in this country?
A definition of rights for those languages?
Right.
Well, I mean, that's going beyond even anything I suggested necessarily defining. I think the commissioner is going to be in certain dilemmas about what exact support to give to different languages in light of the different requests that come in. It will always be a limited budget relative to the needs that could be supported. I would think that there would need to be some decisions on, in a sense, a sliding scale and numbers warrant type basis, as there is with decisions about official language communities. that are minority language communities. At the same time, there are some different moral imperatives at stake in the context of Indigenous languages, and particularly where government action has led to their diminishment in very direct ways through the residential school system. So one of the other things I would think on is, should the Commissioner receive any more guidance through the legislation, or is all of that left to the discretion of the Commissioner?
That's a good question. So, as you see it, it's not a definitive right for 90 supposedly different languages, but that yet to be determined on a possible sliding scale determined by a number of other factors.
I would think that the particular rights for different languages are going to differ based on a lot of different factors.
Right.
There are languages, tragically, that are beyond the point of no return, in a sense, if they're down to a handful of speakers. There may be value in preserving and digitizing those languages, but there's not going to be an ability to save and revitalize those languages in the same way that there is for a language that has the possibility of being a vibrant language of life for communities.
Right. You mentioned something, another one, you mentioned the French-English version. Being on the Regs Committee, the Siksika Nation had a land settlement, that piece of land in Banff Park in 2013. That still hasn't been settled because the word ownership in French is different from English. It's now 6 years later, and on the Regs Committee, we still can't get that fixed. So what you're suggesting to do with funding here, there is a problem with this legislation that could cause a problem in the future and needs to be fixed.
I think it would be constructive to fix it rather than to have inconsistent versions. I'm by no means, I'm not an expert on English language drafting, let alone French language drafting or bilingual drafting, but the language chosen in the English and French versions of Section 7 differs in ways that it doesn't differ in other Indigenous rights documents from the Government of Canada, and I think it does need to be fixed to one version or the other in order to clarify Parliament's intent.
Right. 2 minutes. There's a couple of other words in there, and I appreciate that, and I hope you submit that because I think that's a critical piece to try to get the legislation as correct as possible going forward. So please submit that. There's a couple of other words in there in Section 7, diverse and adequate. Have any idea how you would define those legally? You referred to Section 7.
Right. So in terms of the adequacy, it's open to some interpretation, and it's something that could be determined through the ongoing processes. But there might be ways to offer clearer definition to what would be considered adequate, particularly if this is giving rise to a funding obligation on the one possible interpretation of it. The word diverse, I think, on the ordinary language of it, would reflect an aim to try to deal with a variety of different Indigenous governments.
Then why don't you use the word variety?
There could be more clarity there too.
Good, thank you. Would you submit possible suggestions for those two wording things? Because funding is critical. Would you submit that?
I would be pleased to submit some written materials. I didn't think I could in advance of this session, ironically due to language rules that if there wasn't time for translation of it, it wouldn't make its way to the committee anyway.
Well, I'd appreciate it if you would do that.
Okay.
Very much. And that stands for both the witnesses and all the witnesses who appear, that they can all provide written materials afterwards if there are additional things that you would like to add in. Nous allons, Monsieur Nantel, maintenant, vous avez 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup. Alors, Mr. Nantel, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Newman and Mr. Marceau, Ms. Grant. Now, as for CIJA, you alluded to the rich visual production of the use of Hebrew in Israel, enriched the language, enriched the culture. And I think Quebec shares this richness, as it were, where we can see the willingness to change the situation for the entire country and its culture. And perhaps we can see a very bright future for these indigenous languages. Now, of course, contexts are quite different, perhaps, between the State of Israel and the various First Nations in this country. Which and how can we decide on who are the organizations that are representative for these communities and the choice of these initiatives? Thank you, Mr. Nautel. Well, perhaps this enrichment is due to the fact that both societies decided to surround themselves with different cultural and linguistic communities, and they celebrate the differences as well as their commonalities. As to which organizations might be the most representative, it's extremely difficult. Speaking of Indigenous nations or peoples in Canada, to come up with a single answer. You may have a small community in BC or Saskatchewan or Ontario, and with great differences. One of the advantages of this bill is its flexibility, the flexibility accorded not only to the government itself, but to the Commissioner of Indigenous Languages to calculate the degree of or the measure of his actions depending on the needs and the response of the community. The government in this instance is there to support. It's a supportive role. It's there to receive requests from the community itself. And I believe that the Assembly of First Nations is quite favorable to the bill, apparently. The onus is on the First Nations, in fact, on the Indigenous communities themselves to select their own objectives, and it's up to the federal government and other orders of government as well, of course, to support their needs and their requests. Thank you. My next question is addressed to Professor Newman. You spoke of participation by the provinces. Do you feel, Mr. Newman, that there's anything that might ensure and secure the participation of the provinces in order to have a positive rollout rather than a negative rollout of this bill?
Certainly, Section 8 speaks to the possibility of cooperation with the provinces. I think that that's very constructive. I'm not sure that other means are to be found in the legislation itself so much as in constructive dialogue with the provinces to bring them on board. And that's an important ongoing initiative to engage in. But we do live in a federation, and it's not the place of the federal government to legislate requirements upon the provinces. And to the extent that Section 6 appears even in the slightest to do that, there's a potential obstacle to federal-provincial cooperation if the federal government interprets the Constitution in a way that provinces disagree with. But I'd just say I would hope that all provinces would enter into constructive dialogue and that there would be cooperation amongst federal, provincial, territorial, and other governments, including Indigenous governments.
Est-ce que vous croyez que dans ce projet...
Do you believe that in the bill we should perhaps have a clear reference to UNDRIP and the declaration?
I think that a reference to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is very appropriate. I think there are clear references to that. For example, Section 5 sub G speaks to a purpose of the bill in advancing the achievement of the objectives of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples as it relates to Indigenous languages. That's an important reference, and I think a very appropriate sort of reference. The United Nations Declaration provisions on languages are actually more limited than those in some other Indigenous rights instrument. I would mention the American Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, a document recently adopted in the Organization of American States. And just in the last year or two, Canada took a non-position on that declaration. And it's interesting that it didn't go further in support of that declaration.
On y réfère
So
pas par
I'm
des
going to have to
articles
cut it
précis.
there because we're already over time
Okay,
for there.
thank you. Merci.
And I wanted to make sure that we have time for Mr. Tutu, so we will be going to you for 5 minutes, please.
Oh, me?
You.
Okay. Thanks. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and everyone for allowing me to ask us some questions. And I just want to start off by saying, like, I know I was probably surprised a few people today, but I'm very confident that, you know, through this process of committee and my discussion with the minister, that, you know, some amendments would be able to come to some common ground, and some amendments with the Inuit to have unanimous support at third reading on this. So I just want to make that very clear right off the bat. And those are topics for another meeting. But on this, I have some questions for Professor Newman. I noticed looking at it in different sections, I think it was like 5 and 8, where it talks about cooperation with provincial governments, and it's always mentioned provincial or Indigenous governments throughout the bill. I guess from your point of view, would that include territorial governments, or should territorial governments be included in that as well, or are they excluded by not having them named? Thank you.
It would be preferable to specifically enumerate territorial governments within the bill as well.
Okay, and thank you. And again, Mr. Newman, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Nunavut Agreement and the Nunavut Land Claims Agreement, but I think, you know, it's an anomaly. It's unique. I mean, it's a land claims agreement with the Inuit that, instead of choosing to go with a self-government like in Nunatsiavut, where a lot of these things are geared towards, they chose to have a public government to administer all the programs and services. And I think in the very beginning, like in the definitions where it talks about, you know, federal Indigenous governing body, you know, in a unique situation like Nunavut, where the land claim agreement chose to have a public government to administer the territory, that, you know, that should be uniquely like included in there, because right now, you know, if I read this, Indigenous governing body wouldn't cover the territorial government that has the responsibility for delivering programs and services, especially with the languages as well. Thank you.
And I would agree that it would be preferable to include a specific reference to territorial governments, and it may be necessary to refer to Nunavut differently than the other two territorial governments. Even that would require further thought. But as you highlight, it arises as a public government in response to a modern treaty, and has a bit of a different relationship to the country than the other two territories, but it is ultimately public government, and territorial governments are not listed or enumerated in the Act, and they should be.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Thank you very much. So we will now go to Mr. Badaway for the final 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm going to basically ask some of the same questions I asked of the previous presenters with respect to some of the programs that we're already starting on in our part of the world. Down in Niagara, we're putting together, I guess, for lack of a better word, a platform that would really promote Indigenous languages, Indigenous education. So my question to you is with what you're doing within your area of expertise, how do you find it, or how would you move forward with putting different platforms that we locally have put together and promoted? How would you actually move forward in some of those programs with your experience and what you're trying to do in your different areas, as well as with what you're trying to do with the different languages that you're working on?
The question is for Professor or for us?
All three of you.
Professor, and I'll go.
That's a good punt over.
Well, I'd say that issues regarding education are going to require further steps that go beyond what's contained within this bill. They're an important further step to in which context in which it's necessary to offer further support to Indigenous languages. Hopefully the Commissioner's Office will help to identify that as well within the context of this bill. And it would be a much larger discussion to get into specific steps in that context. But I would say that that's an important further area for initiatives.
In Section 9, that and it was mentioned earlier by National Chief Bellegarde, the facilitation cooperation with provincial governments, Indigenous governments, and other Indigenous governing bodies, as well as even municipalities and local level governments and organizations. With your experience in the past, how do you actually facilitate that? How do you go about expediting the processes of which are contained within this whole bill? Cooperation with the different levels of government, the Indigenous community, as well as other organizations that might have an interest in this bill?
Well, there's a lot of work ahead in that regard. There will need to be clear lines of communication and open lines of communication between the federal office involved and all of these other entities that it needs to engage with in terms of provincial governments and in terms of the Indigenous governments involved. There's a challenging task ahead for the Commissioner, so I'd say certainly choose wisely on the Commissioner, get the very best person that you can in that role, and someone who's going to have good lines of communication. That said, in a federation, it's not easy or appropriate to force provincial governments to take steps, but I would hope that all would be enthusiastic to participate in such an important project as that of the revitalization of Indigenous languages.
Pardon me?
The question was also directed to us. Quickly, what you described to Chief Bellegarde earlier, what's happening in your region, seems to be a very interesting microcosm of what can happen when people underground get together, different levels of government, and decide to make it a priority. And that is what we believe is a goal of this bill. So I would suggest that the commission, whoever she or he is, look at what is happening in your region. Another point I want to make, and it goes back to a point that Mr. Urdiga said earlier about who can teach. When we were at the UN, very quickly, Madam Chair, when we were at the UN at the beginning of this month for the launch of the International Indigenous Language year, it was fascinating to speak to a lot of people who from different nations across Canada, and who said we have a limited number of speakers who could teach our children. Unfortunately, they're not sanctioned to teach in school because they didn't go to teachers' college, and thus they cannot have access to the kids. But they are the only ones who can really teach our children, who can not only pass on the language, but the culture and the values that this language carries. So certainly I would urge the government and the commissioner that it would be one of the primary focuses of actionable items when time comes to actually put this bill into force and into action.
Brings you to the end of your time.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
But thank you to all of you, and thank you for allowing us to have a little pause in there. But that brings this meeting to an end, and we'll see.
But just could we ask the analyst to refer the testimony of Mr. Newman to legal counsel for comment?
We're getting more testimony from other witnesses. Can we just talk about that at a later moment? Just to it. I will speak to the analyst and I'll get back to you on that one. All right. Thank you. That brings this meeting to an end.